Hello and welcome to episode number 147, Two Chaps, Many Cultures, this beautiful Tuesday on where I had the intention to go outside and do some fun in the snow. It didn't quite work out that way. It was the best of intentions. So this similar thing happens with many things that we do in life. And today we're going to talk about inclusion with intentions. Do we come to that area, very important area, with the best intentions? Do we understand what those best intentions are? And who better to speak to it than, of course, regularly we bring in experts to tell us how to do this. So stick around. We promise you it's going to be great. Yes, indeedy. Welcome back, pal. How are you today?
I am marvelous. Thanks for asking. I heard you are too because you didn't have to play in the snow. My daughter actually went on a plane this morning. Hey, people are flying. Believe it. In my family, somebody stepped inside an airplane and flew to somewhere else, and she flew to where the snow is. But the intention of playing in the snow didn't manifest for me, but for my daughter. So that is good. Also, I am manifesting that yet again we're having an amazing episode about the culture of business and the business of culture. That's why you're here. That's why most of the people who are watching this are here, we suppose, after all this time. And Brett and I came across an article on the interwebs about, well, there's many articles on this topic, but this one resonated with us on how to hire with intention through the perspective of somebody who works in the diversity, equity, inclusion field. So it's quite easy, some might argue, to hire in a diverse way for your organization, or is it? And then how do you manage the diversity that you found so easy to hire? Did you hire that with intention, or simply to tick some boxes on a list that was given to you by upper management or that you came up with under the shower? I don't know. So diversity, inclusion, hot topic, has always been a hot topic. How do we go about it in the workplace? How do we organize it from a human resources perspective? And we found the author of the article and thought, why should we talk about this? Let's ask her. Welcome to Two Chaps, Many Cultures, Dr. Nika White. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Christian and Brad. I'm happy to be here, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Where in the world are you joining us from today?
So I am in Greenville, South Carolina, which is upstate of South Carolina. We don't have snow here either, but lots of people that I've been in communication with, they are enjoying the snow right now. So
now that is an interesting footprint in the United States, I might argue. Upstate South Carolina, up until 25 years ago, fairly monocultural, I would argue. Maybe there was a low degree of diversity there, but then all of a sudden, many automotive companies from around the world decided to put their facilities there. Big three-letter acronym brands that some of you may have heard of, also tire manufacturers and all the supplier network that goes around in a BMW. Ooh, I said it. So upstate South Carolina had to become global in a hurry, right?
Yes, it did. So you certainly did your homework, Christian. Yes, we are the home of a BMW plant and Michelin and several other industries. But, you know, for those who aren't familiar with Greenville, South Carolina, we are about 2 hours from Atlanta and about an hour and a half from Charlotte, just to give a point of reference. But Greenville specifically is really up and coming. I mean, it's one of those best kept secrets that's, you know, getting out slowly but surely. And we're seeing an influx of people that are finding it fit to bring their families to this area as a place that produces a great level of quality of living. So yeah, I enjoy the area.
So you wrote an article. I guess you wrote more than this one article, but the one that we came across, and I have to look up the headline because it was so fitting. It said, "Hire like a diversity expert, 5 key qualities of inclusive employees." So you went about it not from the organizational point of view, so what do we need to do to be more diverse, but you address it from, hey, I'm a hiring manager. Which type of candidate am I looking for to make it fit my diverse organization or to become a more diverse, inclusive, equitable organization? Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Sure. Well, I'm a firm believer that it's important for organizations to not only just thoughtful about casting the net wide to provide a diverse applicant pool upon which they can select from for new hires. I think that diversity is really critical for organizations that are looking to have that competitive advantage. And so for those organizations that really value diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of its core and it's a strategic focus area, it behooves those organizations to build into their recruitment processes and hiring processes a way to evaluate candidates from a standpoint of their connectivity to the work and the values of DEI. And so that was the lens that I wanted to bring to this particular published work.
Nice. So what would you have to, and let's assume I'm one of these hiring managers and I've been given the task, right? So my CEO tells me, Christian, we've been too monocultural. We need to broaden our horizon. How do I look for the right candidate? What are the steps that I need to take?
Sure. So I'm going to share some of my best practices. And as someone that's a hiring manager as well as a DEI practitioner, I'm kind of blending those two roles. And so one of which that I spoke about in the article is I like to hire individuals that are willing to be fierce negotiators. And the reason why is because when you're thinking about trying to create a higher level of representation within your organization, you want people that are confident in their worth. I find that particularly a lot of marginalized communities, oftentimes they have this level of insecurity because society has really placed all these labels on them and there's stereotypes and there's generalizations, and sometimes it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so when those individuals have a keen sense of their worth, I think that it lends them to want to negotiate for the best offer. And so I look for that. That's actually a sign for me, because if you can value yourself, then you're going to expect others that are part of the organization that you're a part of to value you and what you bring to the table as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's one of them. Would you like me to keep going? Because there's 5 of them.
I love the energy. So, but here's my question. If I am from, which I'm not, obviously, look at me. I come from the privileged part of society. But imagine I were from a marginalized community and my ability to be a confident, tough negotiator hasn't been developed. So how do you make sure that my skill set is still recognized and does get a fair shot?
So I love that question. And, me personally, I like to take those individuals kind of under my wing. I have actually mentored and connected with a number of professionals that are part of the underrepresented populations who were challenged by that. I think that it's important for those of us who have reached a certain place within our careers that we lift as we climb, and we bring others along and we help to provide the perspective and some of the things they need to be considering as they are trying to really map their career trajectory as well. And so if you are an internal hiring manager and you encounter someone and you sense that there's not a high level of self-worth that's being demonstrated and people are not being practicing self-agency, self-advocacy, then I think that deserves a conversation, especially if you have built a relationship to the point to where there's that trusted rapport. Share that information. One of the things that I find to be quite frustrating is that a lot of individuals that are hiring managers in a leadership positions, a part of the dominant majority culture, is that they shy away from providing that constructive criticism to professionals of color because they perceive that they will be interpreted as, some type of bias. But the bottom line is that we all deserve that critical feedback to help us to grow and thrive. And so we're just going to have to choose courage over comfort is often what I say. And actually, that's one of the other characteristics that I address in terms of a trait for inclusive employees. They do choose courage over comfort.
Well, and I want to piggyback on that and pick another attribute that you listed in that article. You're also looking for candidates who have a certain degree, a certain level of self-awareness, and having a self-awareness as well, coming from a marginalized portion of society. Can you specify that? What type of self-awareness are you looking for, and how would a candidate display that?
So I'm really big on self-awareness. I think that this work of inclusion and equity begins at the personal level. So if we are self-aware and we know how to manage and lead ourselves, then we can manage and lead others. And part of helping to sustain a very inclusive environment with a strong sense of belonging and psychological safety, it requires a good level of self-awareness, paying attention to not only your actions and how you're showing up, but also how in which people that you are observing are showing up as well. If you notice that someone is being disengaged, then find ways to bring them into the fold. And so I think that situational awareness is something that not a lot of people pay close attention to. Let's face it, Christian, a lot of organizations, they operate quite lean. You know, people are doing 2 or 3 different jobs in one, which means that oftentimes our head is in the sand and we're just kind of executing to the task at hand without thinking intently about what's going on in our surroundings and paying attention to how people are showing up or how they're not showing up and how they may be disengaged.
Just building on that, because I want to bring in those 2 points. So I come from a culture that's, you know, I'm not a person of color, but I do come from a culture where we do have an embedded tall poppy syndrome in our culture, where we're not really predisposed to tell people how good we are. And so that comes into play even as a person that's not of color. But again, the self-awareness of knowing that about myself when I'm learning about my culture is hopefully, I'm aware of it because I do culture for a living. But other people that are not aware of that, it would rely on someone like you as a good mentor to understand that from their cultural background. Would you agree? So then you can say, maybe encourage them to call it out for themselves. An Australian approach might be self-deprecation, is to say, I'm not really that good, but as my good learned partner here says, he tells me, and quite rightly, I'm fishing for compliments, right? I'm waiting for somebody else to tell me how good I am, rather than somebody else. Is that part of the process as well?
It is, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And so let's take it out of the context of ethnicity or race. Even when I think about gender, sometimes women have a hard time really self-advocating and being communicative about what they can bring to the table and what they have to offer. And so I think that, we just have to get to the point to where, especially in a job interview, that is the most appropriate time for us to sell ourselves. And I think that if we can get over the hurdle of feeling as though we are being perceived in a certain light by self-advocacy, then it may give us more ease to engage in those conversations. But yes, we have to be willing to talk about our skill sets and the value that we're going to bring and set ourselves apart from others. And I think that what makes it even more challenging for those marginalized professionals is that, again, historically, they have been faced with so much oppression that it's harder to sell yourself, because sometimes you begin to have this self-fulfilling prophecy that maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I don't, kind of add up to my majority counterparts. And I want to debunk that and have people to really be able to know that their worth is worth amplifying.
Right. Now, I'm not sure I'm phrasing this correctly. So I lived and worked in smaller cities in the South, similar to Greenville, but I haven't worked in Greenville, but I worked and lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee for many, many years. I guess similar in size and overall social fabric, also strong footprint in automotive, later than Greenville. Okay, happened later than Greenville, but these two cities are often compared as to that regard. Now I live and work in Atlanta, where the dynamic is quite a bit different. So some of my African-American friends who are in the professional arena in the Chattanooga area or in a smaller city in the South, they have been telling me that they feel this pressure, whether it's outspoken or if it's a covert pressure of code switching. So they enter the workplace in a way to fit the dominant work culture that they find in an organization. So more often than not, that means that the Black employee goes to work putting on their white hat, or they're trying to be whitey white men in order to fit in, right? And I'm oversimplifying this, obviously.
Yeah.
Living here in Atlanta and experiencing corporate America in a predominantly African American city, I rarely hear these stories, right? This is I'm Black and I'm proud city. This is Atlanta is Black Mecca. This is where Black people are unapologetically successful. So how do you navigate those two poles? Because I think we find these two work environments depending on where in North America we find ourselves working. Or am I off here?
No, Christian, I don't think that you're off at all. And the way that you described Atlanta is spot on. You know, I think that the level of, Black professionals that have been, settled into deserving roles is much higher percentage than some of the other markets. It reminds me a lot of DC in that regard. And so, and that's why a lot of markets like maybe Greenville or other areas have a hard time, really casting the net wide and attracting those types of professionals, because those areas like DC or Atlanta or Charlotte are seen as greater opportunity, greater prosperity for professionals of color. And so I digress. But the reason that I brought that up is because I think that's part of the opportunity here. We need to make sure that for those places, those markets that may not be heavily populated with diverse talent, that they still are presenting themselves and the opportunities in their market as one that is inclusive and full opportunity for success for all. And so part of doing that is to build these internal organizational cultures to where those places are seen as employer destinations, right? And that's, again, why I feel like it's so important for hiring managers to be thoughtful about, if you have already embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of your value system, then wouldn't it behoove you to make sure that as you're bringing newcomers on board to your organization, that they value that as well? And so, yeah, code switching is huge. It is definitely something that a lot of professionals grapple with, and it causes this harm whereby people begin to deny themselves of their individuality and of their identities. They will try to diminish portions of who they are. They will cover or mask in the workplace, and then what happens is it yields this situation whereby you have conformity, happening. And when people are conforming to the mainstream dominant culture and way of thinking, then you don't get the benefit of diversity, because then you have groupthink, which is where everyone's thinking alike, so no one's really thinking. And that's exhausting. It's exhausting to those professionals who have to put on a facade day in and day out. One of the things that I encourage organizations to do is hire for cultural add and not cultural fit, because cultural fit tends to mean people that are like me, that think like me, behave like me, and that is not how in which you can fully leverage and optimize diversity.
Yeah, you're barking up the right tree. I've struggled with this culture fit paradigm that's been forced through corporate North America for so long. I really, really struggle with that, because it's creating just an army of yay-sayers, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We must understand that the value of diversity, one of the greatest assets would be diversity of thought, right? And I always share that diversity in and of itself is not what produces these great results that we often read about in research. It is effective management of that diversity. And part of effectively managing diversity is being thoughtful to create these team structures whereby you have individuals that are from different walks of life, different experiences, different perspectives and backgrounds. That is what yields greater level of creativity and problem-solving ability. And all of that is what produces really good outcomes.
There's a lot of work to be done here. I joined a conversation last night, an online conversation, where it was trying to network on the best practices of hiring people. And there was this overwhelming message that everybody was going, culture fit is important. I want to hire people that have my values. I want to hire people that understand my organization, that know my organization. And therefore, again, and I'm part of an organization that is struggling with this message. And when I did finally speak up and say, have you thought, by the way, have you thought that culture ad, because I stole your wonderful thing, made myself look good. Culture ad is something that can really, not just for your own internal benefit, but also external benefit, the way that people look at your organization and see your organization. So it expands outside of the individual. It really is a branding. So it's very, it gets very integrated at that point, doesn't it?
No, absolutely it does. And I think it's important also to acknowledge the fact that the two do not have to be mutually exclusive. And when I say the two, I'm referring to having someone that really can align with the values of the organization, but yet still be a cultural ad, meaning that they don't necessarily think and act exactly like the majority of the individuals that are part of that environment. And so I think it's important for organizations to make sure that they resolve that distinction and that they're operating from a place of knowledge as it relates to that.
Mm-hmm. So let's assume every hiring manager, every recruiter follows your guidelines, so to say. Now we're presented with a more diverse workforce, and there will be friction, right? There will be disagreement. There will be different ways of communicating, different ways of resolving problems, or going about managing projects. There'll be friction. Because if we're culture adding, if we're not hiring same, but if we're hiring difference because of pluralism in the organization, many voices, many ideas, many new business opportunities, all these benefits of DEI that we've been preaching for years. So now we have friction. And how do I make sure that an organization is able to manage the friction in a way that it creates energy and not slows us down or inhibits our progress?
I love this question, Christian. What you refer to as friction, I often like to refer to in this context as healthy conflict. And
right.
Every organization needs healthy conflict. I think that first and foremost, we need to change the narrative. We need to help people to understand that conflict is not all bad. Without conflict, then we aren't able to realize some of the greatest inventions and innovations that many organizations are able to produce. And so that's first and foremost. I think the other thing is that I go back to what I said before. Diversity in and of itself is not what produces the great outcomes. It's effective management of that diversity. And part of effectively managing diversity is making sure that you have a learning and development curriculum and strategy where you're constantly exposing people to skill sets and information to be able to handle the fact that they are operating in a diverse society and within a diverse organization. So what does that look like? Do we have conflict, resolution type of skills training that's going forth? Do we have training that helps people to have those crucial conversations, right? So when stakes are really high and you know that there's a difference of opinion, but you really want to make sure that you're reaching some common ground, how do you facilitate people understanding how to do that coalition building and effective collaboration where not everybody has to agree, but that we are allowing people to show up as their authentic selves. The other thing that I will say too is, and this goes back to Brett, what you mentioned before in terms of sometimes there's this conflict between, the cultural fit versus, okay, well, we need people to make sure that they're aligned with our values. The bottom line is that I think that organizations need to become much more communicative about what their values are. And not only just to communicate those values, but also take it a step further and communicate values violators. People need to be able to know, what does it look like when I'm stepping outside of the realm of what is acceptable from a values perspective? And so I am really big about being intentional. And I think that part of the challenges that many organizations experience that have some level of connectivity to diversity, equity, and inclusion or lack thereof is because we aren't communicating enough and deeply enough to help people to really understand what we mean. The constructs of DEI in theory is totally different from the constructs of DEI in practice. We need to move people from just the theory to now the practice. What does it look like?
So I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. In fact, I've seen the lack of communication or the inefficient communication
Right.
within organizations many times over. So in your experience, what will be a good way to communicate these corporate values? I mean, the worst case example that I'm familiar with are what I call wall tattoos. These are these motivational type posters in the hallways of companies that have in bold letters the values that supposedly are the company values, and nobody really knows who hung up that picture or how we came up with that, right? Who gave the wall the tattoo. So in your experience, how does an organization that is striving to become more equitable, more inclusive, and hires accordingly, how do you create these values that represent this diverse workforce, and how do you communicate it?
Yeah, so my background is marketing communications, and I bring that lens, the lens of the power of marketing communications, to the work that I do in this space of DEI. And I think that a lot of it has to do with amplifying the volume. We have to turn the volume up on this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so what I like to encourage organizations to do when they have already decided that part of the value system is to have an equitable and inclusive environment where everyone has a sense of belonging so they can show up at their best, is you need to communicate on it often. And so part of the corporate communications, it needs to be executed with the lens of equity and inclusion. And I find that where organizations are missing the mark is they will align professionals that have experience in communications and corporate communications specifically, but not necessarily this heightened level of sensitivity to the lens of equity and inclusion. And I'm finding this trend now that I think is working to the benefit, where those organizations who are really thoughtful, they are now incorporating as professionals into their corporate communication staff individuals that are sensitivity readers that have, again, this lens of equity and inclusion that can be integrated into the overarching corporate communication strategy. And when you do that, then you're constantly finding very intentional ways of keeping the message of this core value of DEI top of mind for people that are a part of the organization.
Okay.
I just thought of an analogy. It doesn't quite work because there's 12 months in the year, but you mentioned this turn up the volume, and I'm a musician. You know, there's that adage of turn it up to 11, right? Turn it up loud, right? Turned up to 11. And I'm thinking about the month we're in now, Black History Month. And the fact that, Christian and I had a discussion about this yesterday. Why is it just 1 month? Well,
why is it the shortest month of the year?
And it's the shortest month of the year. So then, turning up the volume would mean, 1 month seems like it's down there at zero. We're just in the background. We're elevator music. But turning it up to 11 would be, I wish it was 11 months in the year. I'd say turn it up to 11 means that we should be doing this all the time. We should just have it as an active, integral part of our mindset, both in organizations and personally. So I just thought of that analogy. It just came to mind. I thought I might use it if you don't mind.
Well, it's an appropriate analogy, especially considering that we're on day 2 of Black History Month. I like to refer to it as Black Heritage Month because it's not just about the history. It's also about all of the wonderful things that Black individuals are doing now. But, I think it's kind of akin to, each individual has a birthday, right? You want to make sure that you're appreciating those individuals all throughout the year, but on the day of their birthday, there is some type of special fanfare that's around it. And so that's how I kind of view Black History Month or Black Heritage Month. I do encourage organizations to be thoughtful about creating meaningful impact during the month. And most often, I think what's most meaningful is when you can center the voices of the Black and Brown employees and make sure that they're seen, valued, and heard. And to, more importantly, make sure that you're following up with accountability and with action. It's one thing to be inspired and to hear all the great talk about all the wonderful, Black and Brown people who have done tremendous things. But at the end of the day, what Black people want from their employer perspective is accountability and action to move the needle. How are you making decisions about ensuring upward mobility for Black employees into those senior level positions? How are you creating opportunity companies to ensure that you are providing an experience where, again, those Black employees feel seen, valued, and heard, and are not viewed as tokens. I mean, there's so much opportunity here that I think people miss. And what happens is it causes those Black and brown employees to become offended, and they will see it as performative. And so, yes, organizations definitely need to be careful about how in which they observe and bring some level of heightened awareness to really what's most important to Black employees during Black History or Black Heritage Month.
Now, I mentioned it earlier when we brought you up that you're in upstate South Carolina. I wouldn't say it's a rural area, but it's not an urban cluster like the big cities across North America. And it's traditionally an area that's been more white than Black, or that's been, let's say, not necessarily hyper diverse. I'm careful how I'm phrasing it. Have you seen the mindset around DEI work in the workplace? Have you seen that shift, or have you seen the needle being moved? Are you encouraged by the development, or what's your gauge on that?
So I am encouraged, but let me clarify that even though I am physically based in the upstate, my company is global in nature. So we have global clients, we have clients all over. So what I can say is that what I'm seeing is pretty consistent across the board, even though there may be some markets where organizations in those markets are a little bit further along, they have a different set of challenges, where they sit in terms of the continuum of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am encouraged, and I'm encouraged because first and foremost, I believe that as a practitioner in this space, we have to be at a place to where we always believe that an equitable and inclusive society can be realized. So that's first and foremost. I just choose to be hopeful about it. But I'm also encouraged because I have seen this deepened level of appreciation and respect for the discipline in general. There have been just an influx of organizations who have added on either DEI consultants or even created these chief diversity officer roles. In fact, it was the #1 C-suite position that was marketed and advertised for in 2020. And the conversation is shifting. Whereas before, I think that people were talking very specifically about we need diversity, equity, and inclusion training. Now what I'm hearing is we need a full strategy that looks not only internally at our organizational culture, but also helps us to be a standard bearer of this work in the industry that we serve. And we want to make sure that we are addressing the appropriate level of attention towards our corporate social responsibility efforts. And they're even saying corporate social justice, so the language is changing.
Yep.
Leads me to believe that people have a deepened awareness of the severity of the issue that's causing them to feel called to action, not only at the individual level, but also at the organizational level, which is huge because there are many organizations prior to May 25th, which that date is ingrained in so many of our heads. It was the date of George Floyd's murder that was so visual and so hard. But prior to that, I think a lot of organizations that are very reputable and knew that their influence has a lot of power, they took on this mantra of, this is our space, this is our lane, we're going to stay right here, and we're going to let the individuals or the organizations that are in the space of social justice to deal with that type of thing. Now they're saying we no longer can sit on the sidelines. We realize that our employees are being impacted by what's happening outside of the four walls of our organization, and we need to be there for our employees so that they can be there for us, and show up at their best and be productive. And so the conversation has shifted, definitely.
Okay.
Right.
So we posted the link to the article that we've been referencing. We posted that in the comments or in the chat box or whatever it's called underneath this video, wherever you're watching this, on YouTube or on Facebook, on LinkedIn, you should be able to see that. So go ahead and read that. Do yourselves a favor. You'll be smarter afterwards, as was I, and I'll go back and read it again. Nika, what would be the #1 or the top 3 points of advice you would give somebody in whether they're a hiring manager or in a human resources function, or I don't know, in an organization, operational role where they're influencing hiring decisions? What would be your top advice when it comes to hiring for a more diverse organization?
I think my top advice is we have to get to a place to where we are keenly aware of the difference between activity versus impact. And when I think about activity, it has a start and an end date. And I think that in order for us to create sustainability around the work of DEI, whether or not it's around recruitment and retention, or even some of the learning and development or other opportunities, we have to drive towards impact. And what that looks like is you have to consider culture, systems, policies, procedure. That's how you really are able to move the needle. And so hiring a person of color or someone that's part of another underrepresented population or dimension of diversity, that is just an activity. If you really want to be impactful, think about not only your recruiting strategies to cast the net wide to those populations, but equally important, think about what are you doing to ensure that your organizational culture is going to lend itself to where that individual has a sense of belonging, acceptance, that they can bring their whole self to that environment, that they don't have to conform, but it's okay for them to be authentic to who they are, encourage that. And then I think that what you're going to see is that those organizations are going to have less ability for this revolving door to occur, where people are coming in and out, because even though they're recruited, they're not going to stay. And so again, activity versus impact, there's a difference there. Excellent.
Well, Dr. White, Dr. Nika, I didn't even ask you how you would like to be addressed. I just jumped right in. I apologize.
No, this was a great conversation. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to share.
Well, we were happy that you were able to find time to join us for this episode. I love it. So again, folks, check the comment section below for the link to the article, and that will also lead you to Dr. Nika's website, where you'll find more about her work. There's more than just this one story, and it's worthy of exploring. We'll be back again tomorrow with yet another how-to episode, so stay tuned for that, which means that not only are we going to talk about a how-to topic, we'll follow it up with a Clubhouse conversation right after the episode. So we're going to take it from live streaming to live chatting. Unfortunately, it's still for the very exclusive club of people that have a fruit symbol on their phone, but it might change in the future. Who knows? So stay tuned for that tomorrow. What else do we need to mention, Brett? And we can't hear him for some reason. That's all right. He may have run out of juice in his battery for his microphone. Yeah. This is a good sign for us to come to a conclusion. Stephen is watching and thinks it's wonderful. Stephen is also in one of the Carolinas. I forgot which one. Okay. And then we have here a LinkedIn user that shall be unnamed. Many struggle with defining cultural fit in a diverse and inclusive environment. Yes, we talked about this. And you might remember Trevor because he remembers you, Nika. Who knows? Who knows? Yes. Small world here. All right. Nika, thank you very much for joining us today. Yeah. This was Two Chaps Many Cultures on this February 2nd, Tuesday. Be safe, everybody. Be smart. And if you have to go outside, mask up. Yes. Remember, Nika, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hope to see you in real life soon when it's safe to travel. Brett's found his mic.
I'm back.
Well, then let's do another 30 minutes. Okay.
You didn't. My brother joined. My brother's from Australia. My younger brother, who's a lot smarter than me, and I know he works in a very diverse. So he's saying that diversity is dynamic. So I thought that.
That's great.
Which is good. I mean, it's again thinking about that external, how people see your organization, and I think that any diverse organization is seen as dynamic by nature of its of the things that people see. So I thought that was a good. Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad I got my microphone back. And no, I'm not going to go and play in the snow. I've got other things to do.
Thanks, everybody. Two chaps and one smart lady. We're out for today, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.
Thanks.